So what's your favorite candy?
You know, sugar.
She's been arrested 5 times for chaining herself to trees and blocking pipeline equipment. And somehow, through all of it, Daryl Hannah became one of the most arresting faces in American cinema. Not by fitting in, but by being constitutionally unable to. If you only have 30 seconds, here's the bottom line of this video. Daryl Hannah did not become the face of Blade Runner and Kill Bill by playing the Hollywood game. She became unforgettable by inventing looks on set that nobody asked for, by volunteering physical stunts that weren't in the script, and by refusing to smooth out the very qualities that made casting directors nervous. Her secret was not beauty in any conventional sense, although she is, obviously, gorgeous, but actually was the absolute refusal to perform normalcy. Well, if you want a bit more of an explanation, follow me. Welcome. I'm Kira, and this is your beauty blueprint. I have spent an entire week researching, watching, and editing all things Daryl to bring you her very essence and share the best of what I found. And there's a lot to look at. So what are the ingredients of this woman's particular magic? We are talking about a girl who was so painfully shy she could not make eye contact, who rocked back and forth alone in her room, who was called beanpole and toothpicks by her classmates, and who grew up to become a 6-foot-tall replicant in thigh-high boots. We are talking about an actress who turned down glamour over and over, who fought directors for the plainer roles, who showed up to auditions deliberately unrecognizable, and who still ended up defining what science fiction femininity looks like for an entire generation. We are talking about someone whose most famous on-screen look, the raccoon stripe eyes of Priest in Blade Runner, was never in the script, never designed by a makeup department, never approved in advance. She just did it. That tension between hiding and revealing, between the girl who wanted to disappear and the woman who could not stop being seen, is what we are going to unpack today. And stick around, because by the end of this video, I will serve us a practical beauty breakdown of what we can learn, very specifically from Daryl Hannah's style universe, and how to translate her most striking choices into something you can actually wear on a Tuesday. Before we go any further, I should mention that I designed a Daryl-inspired t-shirt just for us. You will find a link in the description, and honestly, I am a little obsessed with how it turned out. Now, pour yourself something cold and slightly reckless, maybe a glass of white with ice in it, which is exactly the kind of thing Daryl Hannah would do, and settle in. Here's a little backstory. Daryl Christine Hannah was born on December 3rd, 1960, in Chicago. Her father, Donald, ran a barge company. Her mother, Susan, was a schoolteacher who would later become a producer. They divorced when Daryl was about 7, and her mother married Gerald Wexler, a wealthy industrialist and brother of the great cinematographer Haskell Wexler. That remarriage moved the family to Long Grove, Illinois, into a big house where Daryl suddenly had her own room and her own bathroom, a shift from modest circumstances that left her, in her own telling, feeling paranoid that none of it was real. It was gruesomely too good to be true. At around age 5, she was diagnosed as borderline autistic. Extreme shyness, a total inability to make eye contact, self-soothing by rocking back and forth, social isolation so complete that a teacher told her mother there was absolutely no reason for the child to be in school. Her mother refused the doctor's recommendations. Years later, Daryl said, "I'm so thankful she didn't, because I'd probably still be there today." Instead, Mother took Daryl to Jamaica for roughly a year, hoping the change would help. When she came back to Chicago and enrolled at Francis W. Parker School, a progressive private institution in Lincoln Park, she was mercilessly bullied. She was tall, stick-thin, white-haired, and had a boy's name. Acting was the only place where the noise stopped. She started ballet at 4, not by choice, but because doctors had recommended leg braces for flexibility problems, and her mother chose dance instead. Her teacher was Maria Talchief, the legendary prima ballerina, who later said Daryl could have become a Balanchine dancer. But Hannah quit ballet at 11 after a fortune teller predicted she would become a prima ballerina, and she decided she hated it. What truly called to her was film. She suffered from chronic insomnia, stayed up late watching movies, and the moment she saw Singin' in the Rain, she knew. She moved to Los Angeles at 17, ostensibly to study at USC's School of Theater. Her first week in Hollywood nearly ended in disaster when she was almost lured into a trafficking situation in Las Vegas, and escaped by locking herself in a bathroom and catching the next flight home. Her actual film debut came that same year, a blink-and-miss-it part in Brian De Palma's The Fury, alongside Kirk Douglas. 4 years later, everything changed. Ridley Scott was casting Blade Runner. 5 actresses screen-tested for the role of Pris, the acrobatic pleasure model replicant in his dystopian noir. And here is where the Daryl Hannah story stops being just biography and becomes a blueprint for something else entirely. So listen up. She showed up to that audition and was, by her own admission, devastated by what the other girls looked like. They were really beautiful, she said, and she looked like a total freak. So she leaned into the freak. She found a blonde wig, a yak hair piece that looked deliberately artificial, and then she did something that no one had asked her to do. She took black makeup and smeared it in a thick, dramatic stripe across her eyes and the bridge of her nose, inspired by Klaus Kinski's look in Nosferatu the Vampire. No one in the makeup department designed that look. No director requested it. She walked in wearing it, and Ridley Scott saw Prez. Think about that for a moment. One of the most recognizable images in cinema, those raccoon dark eyes on pale skin, that feral punk femininity that influenced everyone from Siouxsie Sioux fans to Alexander McQueen runway shows, was improvised by a 21-year-old with autism who was scared the other girls were prettier. She also asked Scott whether she could incorporate gymnastics into the fight scene, a detail only implied in the screenplay. The character's acrobatic flips and cartwheels, now so central to who Prissy is, were largely Hannah's invention. Harrison Ford told her to genuinely grab his nose during their confrontation, and she did, hard enough to draw blood. Blade Runner was selected for the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. Press became an aesthetic reference point that has not faded in over 40 years, and the woman who designed that look did it because she felt too weird to compete on anyone else's terms. Now, here's what I want you to hold in your mind as we keep going, because this is really the core of today's video. The thing that made Daryl Hannah extraordinary was never technique, or training, or a team of experienced professionals. It was the instinct. She could not do what the other girls did, so she did something else, and that something else turned out to be genius. And the other, prettier, better girls got nothing. By the way, if you are finding this interesting and want more of these, do me a small favor and hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel survive, and it means I get to keep making these for you. Mercy. 2 years after Blade Runner, splash happened. The role of Madison the Mermaid had been turned down by Michelle Pfeiffer, Tatum O'Neal, Melanie Griffith, Diane Lane, Kathleen Turner, and Sharon Stone. For Daryl, it was destiny. She had been swimming with her legs bound together since childhood, mimicking Little Mermaid. She could swim 120 feet in the 35-pound tail and performed virtually all underwater scenes herself. The film made $69 million on an $11 million budget, launched both Hannah and Tom Hanks to stardom, and even popularized the name Madison for baby girls. Then came Roxanne with Steve Martin, where the Washington Post called her the silent comedy dream girl. Then Wall Street, which Oliver Stone himself admitted was a mismatch, and which earned her a Golden Raspberry for Worst Supporting Actress, making Wall Street the only film to simultaneously win an Oscar and a Razzie. Then Steel Magnolias, where she fought for the unglamorous character role of Annelle, rather than the flashy part that launched Julia Roberts, and showed up so transformed that security would not let her in, and director Herbert Ross did not recognize her. She treasured that set, and later said it marked the first time she experienced women in a positive collaborative way on a film. Off-camera, her life was turbulent in ways that Hollywood gossip could barely contain. She spent roughly a decade with singer-songwriter Jackson Browne through the 80s, until the relationship ended amid allegations of domestic violence. Her uncle Haskell Wexler went public, describing ugly black bruises and blood in her urine, and photographed her at the hospital. Browne denied all of it. No charges were filed. Joni Mitchell wrote Not to Blame in 1994, widely interpreted as a response to the incident. The matter was never legally resolved. Before Browne was entirely out of the picture, Daryl had reconnected with John F. Kennedy Jr., whom she had first met as a teenager on St. Martin. Their romance lasted approximately 5 or 6 years, overlapping with the end of the Browne era and Kennedy's own previous relationship. His best friend called her as beautiful as a sunrise. Marriage speculation was relentless. Hannah once told Entertainment Weekly, "It's getting really annoying. This morning I call up my plumber and even he asks me." The relationship fractured around Jackie Kennedy Onassis' decline and death in May 1994. Shortly before, Daryl's dog Hank had been fatally hit by a car in Central Park while in JFK Jr.'s care, and he flew to LA to bring her the ashes. But during that trip, his mother's condition worsened sharply. According to those close to him, Kennedy was deeply resentful that Daryl had pulled him across the country for the dog's funeral while his mother was dying of cancer. At Jackie's memorial, a friend observed that it was clearly over, that John could barely look at her. Kennedy married Carolyn Bessette 2 years later. 3 years after that, on July 16, 1999, John Carolyn Bessette and her sister Lauren died when his plane crashed into the Atlantic. Hannah never issued a public statement. Her silence held for over 25 years until March 2026, when an FX series produced by Ryan Murphy depicted her as whiny, drug-obsessed, and inappropriate. The series is called Love Story. You might have heard of it by now. It's kind of a hot topic. I must confess, I just binge-watched the first 4 episodes while making this video. I try not to binge TV, but I almost felt like I had an excuse here. I honestly still prefer the character of Daryl there to Carolyn, even if it's wrong. Have you seen it yet? Well, Daryl Hannah broke her silence in a New York Times op-ed, writing that the character in the series was not even a remotely accurate representation of her life, and sharing a piece of advice that Jacqueline Onassis once gave her, that tabloids and magazines often sold ridiculous lies, but they were nothing more than birdcage liner by the next day. Now, are you still with me? Well, good, because here's where the story takes its most interesting turn, and I think this part contains the real lesson. By the late 90s, Daryl Hannah's career had quietly collapsed. She attributed the decline partly to turning 30 in an industry that discards women at that threshold, and partly to Harvey Weinstein. She said he pounded on her hotel room door at Cannes and she barely escaped through a back entrance. The next night, she barricaded herself in with furniture. When he later asked to touch her breast, she told him to fuck off. After Kill Bill became a huge hit, she never got even a meeting for another role, and she believed it was tied to Harvey Weinstein's resentment and influence. Quentin Tarantino was her resurrection. He cast her as Elle Driver, codename California Mountain Snake, in Kill Bill after spotting her in a 2000 television film called First Target. He was drawn to the physical resemblance between Hannah and Uma Thurman, both tall, both blonde, both striking, and used that mirror quality to build the rivalry between their characters. Elle's eye patch was inspired by Christina Lindberg in the 1973 Swedish exploitation film Thriller: A Cruel Picture. Hannah's most celebrated sequence is the whistling scene, where Elle stalks a hospital corridor dressed as a nurse, whistling Bernard Herrmann's eerie theme. In Volume 2, the trailer fight between Elle and the bride was relocated from a scripted desert showdown to the cramped interior of Bud's mobile home after Tarantino watched Jackass the movie and decided the fight needed to be dirtier. The scene ends with Beatrix ripping out Elle's remaining eye, and Hannah improvised the frenzied aftermath, running into walls and destroying the bathroom, specifically because she thought it would make Tarantino laugh. It did. The take was kept. She actually sustained real injuries. That film won her the Saturn Award for Best Supporting Actress and an MTV Movie Award for Best Fight. And Elle's fate was left deliberately open, a question mark over her name in the end credits rather than a line through it. Well, if you are enjoying this, leave me a comment and tell me which Daryl Hannah role or act surprised you the most, because I genuinely want to know. And if you want access to the members-only podcast episodes, consider becoming a channel member, or better yet, a Patreon. To our current members, you know who you are, and I am so grateful for your support. After Kill Bill, Daryl found a new creative home with the Wachowskis on Sense8, playing the mysterious Angelica Turing, and off-screen she found Neil Young. They met while working on a Greenpeace documentary about the Alberta tar sands, traveled together for 6.5 hours in Young's 1959 Lincoln bioelectric car, and fell deeply in love. Neil Young's divorce from his wife of 36 years was painful and public. David Crosby called Hannah a purely poisonous predator, though he later apologized. Daryl and Neil Young married in 2018 aboard his yacht in the San Juan Islands. Joni Mitchell and Stephen Stills attended. Neil Young serenaded Hannah with Harvest Moon. Today, they live on a sustainable farm near Lakefield, Ontario, in a 116-year-old cottage. Their Malibu home was destroyed in the 2018 Woolsey wildfire. She has directed 4 documentaries about Neil Young, including Coastal, a black-and-white film shot partly on her iPhone that premiered in 2024. She is developing a feature screenplay described as an homage to Sunset Boulevard, but darker and funnier. Now, let us talk about some interesting psychological tension. Daryl Hannah is tension incarnate. She is the mermaid who became a snake. She is the fantasy object. She is the star who hid from spotlights because they genuinely terrified her. Her autism, hidden from executives for decades, and revealed publicly around 2013, was not a footnote to her career, but the engine of it. The same neurological wiring that made social interaction agonizing, made inhabiting fictional characters feel like salvation. She once said, "I wanted to be physically transported to other realities," and she spent a career doing exactly that. Her favorite thing, she told one interviewer, was to be naked, which is why she always lives in remote areas. There is something almost philosophical about that. The woman who felt most herself when there was nothing between her and the world, and most terrified when the world looked back at her. She never played the Hollywood game because she was neurologically incapable of it. When she was young, she said, Most respected actors did very little press. They did not go on talk shows. There was something mysterious about them, so you could believe their characters. Now, she added, it is all about selling shit. That refusal, combined with Weinstein's alleged sabotage, consigned her to a wilderness from which only Tarantino could rescue her. So here is our beauty and style breakdown, and I promised you this would be practical, so let us make it practical. That famous Priz look from Blade Runner is, at its core, three things. First, extreme contrast, very pale skin against a single, heavy, dark accent. Daryl used black makeup and a wide band across her face. The key is that it is not precise. It is not a cat eye or a smoky eye or anything the beauty counter would recognize. It is a deliberate, slightly feral smear. If you want to reference this, use a matte black cream shadow and apply it with your fingers, not a brush. Across the lid and slightly below, blending the edges just enough that it looks intentional but not neat. The rest of the face stays almost bare. That is the whole point. One daring gesture, committed to fully. Second, texture over polish. Prisa's hair is deliberately artificial looking, stiff, pale, almost doll-like. You do not necessarily need a wig. The takeaway is that she understood the power of hair that looks like it belongs to a character rather than a person. If you just want to feel like a different version of yourself on a Saturday night, consider pulling your hair back tight, or wearing it deliberately roughed up, sprayed stiff, not blown out and glossy. The anti-glamour is, in a way, just a different type of glamour. Third, body language as beauty. Prise moves like an animal. She crouches, she cartwheels, she is coiled and taut. So much of what made that look mesmerizing was not the makeup at all, but the physicality Hannah brought. Pilates 2 to 3 times a week was her thing. She trained in ballet and gymnastics. The lesson is that the most striking people in any room are usually the ones who move with a specific quality of intention. It costs nothing. It changes everything. And beyond Blade Runner, the broader Daryl Hannah style blueprint is really about simplicity, pushed to an extreme. Crazy blonde hair, minimal makeup, a California naturalist sensibility that was always at odds with Hollywood red carpets. She dressed down so consistently that when she dressed up, it felt like an event. When you are not constantly performing glamour, the moments when you do become exponentially more powerful. She never gave a long list of product recommendations.
You're a vegetarian, is that right?
Yeah.
So you just strictly vegetables?
Well, I'm sort of a starch and candy-atarian.
Starch and candy?
I don't like vegetables. I've been a vegetarian since I was 11.
You've been a vegetarian since you're 11,
Yeah.
but you don't like vegetables, so that just leaves
Candy.
Snickers? Do you just eat candy all?
Well, no, I mean, I'm learning to eat properly now.
Right.
I'm starting to eat properly.
So what's your
but,
favorite candy?
You know, sugar. Anything
Sugar,
like
sugar.
plain, direct, you know.
So dinner's like a Mars bar?
Yes. Well, no, not so much chocolate, more like the straight sugar stuff. You know?
Straight sugar,
Yeah.
just.
Yeah. But I heard that you use the same excuse that I do about not eating vegetables.
I'm not a big vegetable eater.
You say you're allergic to them?
I'm allergic.
What
That's
happens
it. I'm
to
allergic.
you?
She was vegetarian since age 11, after bonding with a calf on a transport truck. She lived on solar power. She drove a 1983 El Camino running on recycled cooking oil. The woman's beauty philosophy, if you can even call it that, was essentially take care of yourself, leave most of it alone, and commit fully to the one thing you do choose. To close us out, here is something Daryl Hannah once said that I think is worth sitting with. I wasted too much time, scared, self-conscious, and insecure. Life is too short to stress the small things anymore. And maybe that is the real blueprint. Not the black eye paint or the mermaid tail or the eye patch. Not the JFK Jr. romance or the Weinstein defiance or the 5 arrests. The blueprint is this. The things about you that feel like deficits. The awkwardness, the inability to fit in, the face you think is too strange for the lineup. Those might be the exact materials you need. Daryl Hannah walked into a room full of beautiful women, felt like a freak, and painted her own face into something no one had ever seen before. She won. Ridley Scott cast her in one of cinema's greatest films. Ron Howard made her a star. Oliver Stone could not direct her. Quentin Tarantino resurrected her, and when Hollywood would not let her work anymore, she built a solar-powered life on a Canadian farm, pointed a camera at the man she loved, and kept making her own things anyway. That is Daryl Hannah, and I think she might be onto something. Thank you for watching, my beautiful, beautiful friend. I've queued up the next chapter for you here. I'll see you soon. Love, Kira. Now go. go create your own blueprint.
Did you have a good time?